The topic for today's notes is the 1863 turning point battles of the Civil War. So far we've covered the first 2 years of the war, but up to that point things had not been going terribly well for the North. Really, the South had done a better job with their strategy of just trying to make sure that they don't lose the war. They'd won a bunch of the battles, particularly in Virginia, and the Anaconda Plan wasn't working out all that well for the North. But things turn in 1863, kind of the midway point for the war, and it's also going to mark the turning point in terms of the North takes firm control of the war after these important battles. So by 1863, the blockade, the B of the Anaconda Plan, had become much more effective. The North had enough ships that they were able to really seal off the Confederate coastline, and that created a lot of real problems in the South. The South wasn't able to get its cash crops out, especially cotton, and so because they couldn't sell the cotton to Europe, they weren't able to buy or bring in the things that they needed, especially weapons and bullets and medicine for the soldiers out on the fields. So the South is really hurting because of the blockade. So Robert E. Lee decides it would be worth it to take another gamble, to try to go north and invade the North like he did a year before. When he did that before, it didn't work out well. He was beaten, or really it was kind of a tie, but either way he didn't win. He was forced to come back after the Battle of Antietam. He decides the time's right for another try. He invades Pennsylvania. He knew that he had to try to do something. The South couldn't last indefinitely, especially when they were blockaded off, and he had hoped that by invading the North and taking the war to the North, he might convince Northerners to give up. Gettysburg in Pennsylvania is near Washington. It's not too far from Washington, D.C., and it was attractive because there were some supplies there, particularly shoes, that the Confederate Army needed. And so some of Lee's army, it wasn't his whole army, some of his army veers off towards Gettysburg, where they actually run into sort of a outside patrol of the Union Army. And so these two sides start skirmishing with each other near Gettysburg, and more reinforcements show up. Before you know it, both armies are in a full-blown battle. The battle took place over 3 days, July 1st to 3rd, 1863. And long story short, it goes back and forth for the first couple days, but on the third day, the South lost badly. Lee lost over a third of his army in the infamous Pickett's Charge, where he sent a lot of his army up the middle, and they were beaten back pretty badly by the Union Army. Gettysburg gets the nickname the High Tide of the Confederacy. Up to that point, the South had been pretty successful. They'd won a bunch of battles. Lee had been the more successful general, and the Southern Army had been winning quite a bit. But after Gettysburg, Lee was pretty depleted. He didn't have enough men to really threaten the North again. He was really forced to be very defensive. He could defend and retreat and just try to keep Richmond from being captured. Meanwhile, while this is going on, General Grant was still out west working on Part C of the Anaconda Plan, winning key spots on the Mississippi River. By the middle of 1863, the only spot left to conquer, the one big shining city left to conquer, was Vicksburg, Mississippi. And Grant's army in 1863 had surrounded the city and laid siege to it. And things got pretty rough for the people in Vicksburg. They ran out of food. They ended up eating rats and horses. I mean, there's just awful stories of the tough conditions for the people in Vicksburg, but they held out as long as they could. Grant blasted the city, right, firing shells and cannons into the city and forcing some people to even go as far as living kind of in caves. It got pretty rough. And they held on for a good while, but on July 4th, 1863, the day after the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, Vicksburg finally surrendered. So these two battles especially, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, are in a lot of ways known as the turning point battles of the Civil War. Because after these battles, if you take a look at the A, B, C of the Anaconda Plan, Lee's army was badly damaged and he was stuck trying to defend Richmond. He couldn't attack anymore. So the North is making headway on letter A. The blockade, letter B, was working better. It was really making things tough for the South. And the North had achieved letter C. The North controlled the Mississippi River, and they had achieved the goal of cutting the Confederacy in half.